Oh man, okay. This has been really exciting being here at GLA. Is everyone like really enjoying this like I am? I guess it would be awkward if you weren't. You just like be quiet right now. But no, I'm just really impressed that like this is actually happening. I'm really impressed that the HPA and our chapters department, like all of you have pulled this off. Can we actually just get like a round of applause for the staff and organizers? There, some of them. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for letting me talk today, by the way. What? I don't know. I'm honored. So I've been working for the Harry Potter Alliance for 3 years this May, and I actually started volunteering for the HPA a few years before that. So I've been with this crew for a while. And in recent years, I've had the distinct privilege to represent the HPA at all kinds of events around the US and even in England and the Netherlands. I've gotten to meet a bunch of you, seen some of you grow up, weirdly enough, become friends, and I've grown up a lot in that time too, in some ways that are obvious to some of you. My voice is a little bit deeper than when I first started representing the HPA. But I've also grown in other ways that are more personal or more confined to my day-to-day professional life and the ways I look at the world and my place in it. And I remember my very first speaking event on behalf of the HPA. Back then I was just a volunteer, but I had been making videos on the HPA's YouTube channel, which picked up some attention, so I'd been invited to speak on a panel at MIT. They have a annual conference called Futures of Entertainment, where academics and industry folk get together and discuss new ways of using media and storytelling, and I was incredibly honored and so excited. It was the first time that like I had a conference badge that said speaker, and I remember I stole a bunch of the programs with my name in them to send to my mom and my grandparents. None of them were as excited about it as I was. But it was a fantastic conference. I met a lot of great people who have become friends and collaborators over the years, including actually the moderator of the panel, Sangeeta Shrestova, who's now on the HPA board of directors. But the actual panel was a blight on my memory of an otherwise marvelous weekend. It was a panel that went so horribly, from my perspective at least, that as soon as it ended, I called our co-founder, Andrew Slack, and resigned from the HPA. Because I thought I had represented us that badly. He didn't accept my resignation, of course, which I'm continually grateful for. That's why I'm here. But so on the panel with me was Dorian Electra, whose music videos include a series on economic historical figures and concepts, as well as Bassem Tariq, who was discussing his 30 Mosques blog project / road trip. And the panel was structured so that we could take questions panel instead of just at the end. So about halfway through the panel, we got derailed from all other discussion when a question referred to the three of us as activists. I don't remember what all three of us immediately rebuked that label. We weren't activists, we insisted. We were artists. Sure, our art had led to some social change or awareness, but we considered it art and foremost. Any social change on the back of it was pure coincidence. I of course, quickly clarify as the HPA activist organization, yes, but I, as an individual, did not personally identify as an activist. The audience was astounded, and in some cases, outraged. The barrage of questions and shouting was deadening. It was exactly the kind of thing you imagine as your worst fear before your first professional panel. And the audience, who, like many of whom were accomplished activists in their own right, they were just completely appalled that we could sit up there on a panel that they believed to be about activism and deny that we were even activists. The panelists and I, we kept grasping at straws, trying to explain ourselves, failing to distill the indignation, and thankfully Henry Jenkins, who many of you might know as the professor who coined the term fan activism, he cut in to defend us, saying like, the post-9/11 generation is more averse to the word activist. I don't really remember exactly what he said because I was busy preparing my next excuse, which was that the three of us on the panel had coincidentally all been raised in Texas. That wasn't the joke, but cool. In Texas, anyone who didn't fit the mold was taught from a young age not to make a stir, basically. So flying our activist flags loud and proud went against everything we knew. And I'm glad you clearly understand what I meant with that. But the truth was, I really didn't understand anything about being an activist. And the responsibility of the word scared the heck out of me. I felt wholly unqualified to be saying I was an activist when I was so poorly versed in so many issues, from racial justice to immigration to climate change. And I've always been averse to the responsibility of taking a stand. As a kid, I would cringe when leaders or teachers complimented me as a natural leader. I didn't want to be a leader. The thought was too nerve-wracking to be appealing. And plus, how could adults always be telling all of us to be leaders? Surely if we were all leaders, we'd all be going in different directions like atoms in a frenetic state of entropy. There had to be. I was prepared to volunteer for that role. I was so ready to opt out of responsibility, even at a young age, that in kindergarten, when asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said sidekick. And I don't think that was just my obsession with Batman and Robin. Like, throughout my life, I have always run for vice president positions, supporting actor roles, deputy chief at junior CSI camp. Never the real leader, never the boss. My favorite quote in college, in fact, was the classic Christopher Isherwood declaration: "I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking." Don't make me analyze anything. An opinion of the world, maybe write about it for myself, but not take it any further. But working for an activist organization for the past several years has forced me to re-examine those inclinations. I do have to step up, take a stand, take the lead. And not just as an organizational leader, but also as a human who sees problems in our world and is starting to realize that not doing anything is passively perpetuating those problems. But getting to that place of being comfortable taking a stand and pushing myself to be a hero was complicated by another factor in my life. Every hero in Greek tragedies has a hamartia, a tragic flaw. It's a secret weakness that presents the hero with additional internal challenges alongside the external battles they're fighting. Oftentimes, this flaw will be something like the hero's own righteous determination that leads them to misstep, like with Oedipus Rex, or their supreme arrogance, which irritates the gods and causes the hero to make selfish decisions, like Odysseus. My hamartia was something a bit more all-encompassing than a simple quirk of my personality, and the decision that I had to make was whether this would be a true hamartia, something that spells out my fateful downfall, or whether I would shake off the chorus, become my own deus ex machina, and refuse to live in a tragedy. You see, from the time I was a toddler, I knew I was different. There was something I was missing that everyone else seemed to know, without thinking, the way they went about their lives so seamlessly, without squirming in their own skin. How did they do that? It didn't make any sense to me. As I went through preschool and kindergarten, I started realizing that something wasn't right about the way I'd been categorized. I was learning the differences between boys and girls and where my place was, but it didn't. All my friends were boys. Girls didn't even really factor into my worldview. They were these other people that I didn't understand. Most days I got to dress like all the boys in my brother's hand-me-downs, my soccer jerseys, my Bugle Boy branded overalls. Some days, however, like picture days, were another story. On those days, my parents would try to force me into a dress or a ruffled blouse. I would scream and kick, getting sick to my stomach and feeling like Harry after Aunt Petunia gave him that buzz cut with the bangs covering his scar, dreading what people would say about him the next day at school. If only I had truly been a wizard with latent magical powers coming into full force during those moments. My parents and I would always eventually come to some sort of compromise. Like, you can wear whatever pants you want, but you have to wear a frilly shirt, as if that didn't look even more silly. They'd let me shop in the boys section, but my undergarments had to be from the girls. I could go to brothers' Cub Scout meetings, but I had to be in Girl Scouts too. I could cut my hair short, but never above the earlobes. I remember near daily arguments with my mom about cutting my hair. Our compromise of a bob haircut looked terrible, and I knew it even at 6 years old. I wanted a proper haircut like the boys in my class. And one day she leveled with me. Okay, if we cut your hair like a boy, and you dress like a boy, how will anyone know you're not a boy? I stared at her. I didn't understand what she was saying. How was that possibly a problem? In the end, she never did let me cut my hair. Around age 9, I figured out just how embarrassing my appearance truly was to my mom. See, probably everyone that knew me. So I tried being a I bought clothes in the girls section, I grew out my hair, I made friends with the girls, I flirted with the boys. It worked pretty well. I mean, I was still made fun of because I was the nerdy kid who listened to Harry Potter audiobooks on my Walkman and liked to practice stunt work in the hallways during passing periods by pretending to run into walls or fall down flights of stairs. But at least I looked more like people thought I should. You know, being treated like a normal person was a great boost for my everyday confidence. For as long as I was still young and androgynous looking, I was happy dressing however people wanted me to and picking up the social brownie points that came along with it. But in 8th grade, that changed. When we came back to school in August, suddenly all the boys in my class had grown a foot. Even the smallest one, Jonathan Powers, with whom I'd always shared the bond of being the two runts of the breed. They all had deeper voices, terrible acne, the beginnings of facial hair. Meanwhile, not only was I still barely pushing 5 foot, but my hips had started outgrowing the pants I was still sneaking from the boys section, and I got my first taste of Shark Week from that wonderful monthly visitor, which meant I was constantly paranoid about guys finding pads in the pockets of my uniform, since backpacks weirdly weren't allowed in my middle school, and carrying a purse was the universal mark of a girl who had started her period. Something about my body changing in ways that felt so uncomfortable and wrong made me revert back to being a tomboy. I stopped trying to do anything fancy with my hair and existed in t-shirts and athletic pants when I wasn't in my uniform. I ended up quitting a lot of my hobbies. No more piano or karate lessons, no dance lessons that required me to wear anything form-fitting. And I filled that newfound free time by writing stories. Some were adventure tales and fantasy worlds, some were set in our world, but all of them featured a spunky heroine with a nerdy twin brother, or a sarcastic best guy friend. And those male characters are always far more fleshed out than the ones I spent much more time on than the main female character. I didn't have the vocabulary to be aware of my own gender confusion, but I remained drawn to masculine expression. And knowing there was something off, but not knowing exactly what it was endlessly frustrating. I wrote tirelessly in my journals, emo poetry and drawings spilling out of my pen like a rush of angry river rapids. Most nights I went to bed wishing I would wake up in a new body. Some nights I wished I wouldn't wake up at all. Of all the many relatable plot points and inspiring quotes in the 4,224 words in the Harry Potter series, the one that struck a chord most from the time I was small, probably the one that really hooked me when I first picked up the series in 4th grade, was when Harry said that he dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away. For Harry, this was substantiated by strangers in the street regularly seeming to know him, and of course, eventually finding out a secret world existed in which he was the most famous boy of all time. Still, I, like many other kids, I'm sure, had similar dreams. And after I read Harry Potter, it was no longer some unknown relation I dreamed of plucking me out of my frustrating existence, but rather the Order of the Phoenix. Usually Remus and Sirius, maybe with Mad Eye and Tonks in tow, showing up on my doorstep and saying they needed to take me away quickly. The wizarding world needed me, but oh, they'd have to disguise me as a boy. Would that be okay? And while these daydreams may have begun as a 9-year-old reading Harry Potter, they continued well into high school. I mean, after all, we didn't actually even meet the Order of the Phoenix till I was 14, so caught me there. The wishful writing continued as I went through high school and eventually entered another experimental phase of femininity. I wanted the social brownie points again. I wanted a boyfriend. I'm not proud of it, but at the time, it seemed like the only way to do that would be to change myself. Turn myself into what people in my high school deemed to be attractive. I knew I could do this, and after a phase of awkward missteps, I pretty much kind of succeeded. For the rest of high school, I was never without a boyfriend. I had lots of other friends. I was sought after. I had great roles in the school play, on awards, on the acting team. From the outside, everything was great. I was one of the few lucky people who actually had an awesome high school experience. But inside, I was still struggling. I went home every single evening after school and wrote in my journal what my day would have been like if I'd been born a boy. The different clubs I would be in, the clothes I would have worn, the people I'd be dating, the parts I'd be cast in the school plays. Without any resources to help me understand what I was feeling, and with no reason I could see to make any changes to my life that was presently chugging along a cookie-cutter track to perfection, I headed off to college. Towards the end of my spring semester, that first year of college, something happened that started the cogs turning in my head. A classmate posted a status coming out as a transgender woman. She told us her new names and that we should refer to her using female pronouns. She let us know she'd be wearing female clothing to classes. And I had two distinct reactions to this. First, you can do that? I vaguely knew there were medical procedures for transgender people, but I didn't know you could just say you were another gender and that was that. I was fascinated. And second, I felt a huge need to protect her. We were in a very small private college in the middle of Texas, and while it might have had a reputation for being the most liberal school in Texas, it was still mostly populated by students from small towns. It was run by a board of directors made up of pastors. Plus, my brother and I had been in love with glam rock from a very young age. Eddie Izzard was my favorite comedian. I was the kid who got all my friends in trouble by hosting a party where I screened Rocky Horror Picture Show when we were just 12 years old. I figured I was an expert in gender bending. But it didn't take more than double checking what I thought was the correct definition of transsexuality on Wikipedia to realize I knew absolutely nothing about the topic. The difference between all the terms like transgender versus transsexual, some of the more outdated terminology, even the word intersex, all swam in my head, bumping into each other like inner tubes on a lazy river. I was barely able to distinguish between them. It was all so confusing, and yet I felt like I was getting close to the right path for the first time in years. Early on that next semester, when I was a sophomore, fresh from a summer of slinging coffee and partying too hard to avoid the aftermath of my parents' divorce, I stumbled on my next clue on the treasure map that was my mysterious identity. A fellow sophomore on the campus newspaper staff had written about how women's studies was a pointless major. It might have been presented as allegedly satire, I don't really remember, but either way, it was terrible and rightfully led to an uproar on campus. The school radio had the guy on a segment with several women's studies majors along with a couple of queer and trans students where they talked to him patiently about why what he wrote was so wrong. They explained to him that a key concept he was lacking that led to some of the baseless arguments in the article was the difference between sex and gender. Now, I remember listening to the radio show from my dorm room and thinking, there's no difference between sex and gender, those are synonyms. They're not, spoiler alert. As the students on the show continued to patiently explain the concepts to the author of the article, I slowly started understanding that, maybe, okay, yeah, there's some sort of difference between those words. It was kind of like the thing where you hear a definition 5 times, and every time you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. But then 2 seconds later, you forget how it worked again. I started doing a little bit more research on the definitions of the 2 words on my own, really trying to parse out the similarities and differences. I kid you not, I spent weeks alone in my dorm room twisting my brain to fully understand what those concepts meant. It was an obsession because I knew, I could just feel it, that once I cracked this code, the next step would be revealed to me, and I'd be that much closer to figuring out what the heck the feelings I'd always had were. The thing was, I was so uneducated on anything related to gender nonconformity that I didn't even know what words to Google. A few times in my life I had tried I'm a girl that likes boys that maybe likes boys, but that just led to rom-coms about girls who treat gay best friends like accessories. After several weeks of intensive thought, I finally felt comfortable enough to try searching some new terms. I figured out that sex is essentially the label that you're assigned when you're born. It's most likely based on the genitals present at birth, maybe based a bit on the chromosomes if you ever get those analyzed. Meanwhile, gender is what you feel you are. For most people, it aligns with the sex that they're assigned at birth, but some people it's different, and that's what transgender means. Once I was working with the right dictionary, I was able to try all new combinations of words in Google, and before long, I had stumbled upon a treasure trove of transgender message boards and resource sites. I learned more about gender diversity than I ever knew there was to know. I learned about different identities like genderqueer, gender fluid, bigender, agender. I learned about different things you can do to feel more like yourself, like bind your chest. I learned that trans people can be any sexuality, just like people who aren't trans. It was a whole new world filled with millions of people just like me. Maybe I hadn't defeated the most evil wizard of all time, or specifically had someone come to my front door to tell me I was a wizard, but I had tapped on the bricks at Diagon Alley and discovered a secret, magical world where I finally fit in. It was a lot to swallow. I had to figure out just where I fit in the world and what I wanted to do with that information. So as I chewed on this new knowledge and experimented with different parts of my identity, I went on with my life. I studied abroad in Amsterdam, I transferred schools, moved to New York City, and most importantly, I heard about the Harry Potter Alliance. Just when I thought I had found the real-world magical community for me, I was about to enter another one. So I had kept tabs on the Harry Potter fandom for years. In fact, the very first thing I ever did on the internet, apart from using it for homework, was explore Harry Potter fan sites. For me, the internet has always been synonymous with the Harry Potter fandom. So I'd heard about the Harry Potter Alliance peripherally prior to my sophomore year of college, but it wasn't until the HPA's Haitian earthquake relief fundraiser that I really saw the Harry Potter Alliance. In the wake of the 2010 earthquake, the HPA brought together a bunch of YouTubers, young adult authors, and fandom personalities to raise money to send relief supplies to Haiti. Everyone in the world seemed to be doing the same thing at the time. There were celebrity-studded telethons on TV, you kept hearing about individual contributions from rich folks. But what struck me about the HPA's fundraiser as I watched the live streams captivated from my apartment in Amsterdam was that these fans were raising more money than I'd heard of anyone else giving at that point yet. And YouTubers weren't proper famous in 2010. No one had as much influence then as they do now. It was really just a small group of fans coming together. And I'd seen the fandom break websites, climb to the top of the podcast charts on iTunes, and hack the trending hashtags on Twitter. But this was so much bigger. This was using that fan power to help people in need. And the fandom was crushing it. When all was said and done, the HPA raised almost like 100 times more than they had planned to. The HPA brought in with relief supplies sent to Haiti. Now, a lot of you in this room might have heard that story so many times, it might have started to lose its meaning. But to me, it will always be special. Not just because it was truly incredible and really did save lives, but because it was what put the HPA on the map for me. It was the bend in the road that led me to a whole new unimagined path in my life. After that, I kept tabs on the HPA. It wasn't long before I saw a tweet advertising for a volunteer video editor. Making short films, music videos, and other silly projects had been a hobby of mine since early elementary school, so I jumped at the opportunity to apply. And Takia Blackwell brought me on board, and before long, I had joined the ranks of the HPA's ever-growing volunteer staff. And that's where we come back to that ill-fated panel at MIT, where I insisted I wasn't an activist. I'd been volunteering for the HPA for a couple of years at that point, and sure, I could spout off the definition of fan activism, explain our methodology, laundry list our many accomplishments, and talk about our mission, but for some reason, accepting the label of activist for myself still felt wrong. I saw some of the leaders of the organization, like Andrew Slack, Paul DeGeorge, Matt Magiacomo, Melissa Anelli, living their ideals as activists. They knew so much more about the issues in the world and put what they believed into praxis. They didn't shop at stores with bad labor practices. They only worked with merchandise manufacturers with ethical sourcing. They had done their research on energy conservation, recycling methods in the food industry, and implemented that knowledge into their daily habits. They actually paid attention to what was happening in other parts of the world and used their platforms to bring awareness to the need for justice. Me? I just parroted the things I'd been told about the HPA's work. I mean, how could I call myself an activist when I wasn't an active participant in the world of social justice? And did I want to be? I mean, the idea was a little frightening. As I said earlier, speaking up and taking a stand is not a natural inclination for me. I'm always scared that someone will disagree with me and I won't know enough about my stance to be able to defend it. But there was one issue I knew enough about to defend from any naysayers, and that was gender identity. In the intervening years since discovering the world of fellow trans people, I had devoured every resource I could get my hands on. I felt like I was exploring the underworld hedge witch world and the magicians, earning dozens of 7-point star tattoos. I was ravenous for any information I could find. And it wasn't just a hunger in my mind. I felt it was like an itch to be swimming in transgender literature. It was the first time in my life I used textbooks and dense high theory tomes as comfort food. There was no satiating my desire. I read every single book in the transgender section at the NYU's library. And while I was filling every spare second of my life learning about gender identity, I'd also started vlogging for the HPA's YouTube channel. We had a small but consistent audience, and for the first time, there were people I didn't know who were following me on social media, watching my videos and learning from what I was telling them. It was a new responsibility and a level of influence I was unfamiliar with. Fortunately, I had the backing of the HPA to help me with scripts and make sure I didn't mess up. And when we didn't have specific campaigns we needed to be discussing in videos, I started filling my Friday videos with introductory gender theory. I made videos debunking transgender misconceptions, but when I was calling trans people they, I really meant us. I made videos on National Coming Out Day each year reminding queer and trans young people that it's okay to stay in the closet until you're ready, but I was really reminding myself. Even when people thought I was just a cis straight ally, I started receiving messages from people telling me how I helped them, how they'd shown my videos to their friends and family to help them understand their coming out. And though I wouldn't have said it myself at the time, this was the beginning of me becoming an activist. See, the hard thing about accepting a label for yourself is it can be hard to do if you haven't had any positive role models who share that label. And prior to the HPA, I hadn't had any positive activist role models. Where I grew up, there really was only one lifestyle and ideology that was acceptable. All others were demonized to the point that as kids, we truly believed that people who didn't fit that mold led hapless, lonely lives. It took studying abroad in England at the age 15 to meet adults I felt I could identify with. I mean, it might sound silly if you grew up somewhere more open-minded than I did, but at age 15, that was the first time I interacted with non-religious, unabashedly progressive adults who were successful and well-respected. They weren't being shunned by the community for their beliefs. No one was side-eyeing them. They were beloved professors and directors, free to express their beliefs just like anyone else. They were just like anyone else. And when I returned from that semester, I stopped pretending I believed things I didn't and felt confidence for the first time to express opinions that differed from the majority. But it was still on a small, quiet, private scale. Really just if anyone asked. I certainly wasn't about to rock the boat in any major way, unless I could make it a joke, like when I co-founded the Bolshevik Club with a bipartisan leadership at my senior year of high school. I might have met outspoken progressive adults that I could look to, but I still hadn't been presented with positive representations of the word activist. When I was being pressured to identify as one at that MIT panel, I still had visions in my head of someone getting arrested at a protest, kicking and screaming at the police, dragging them away. And I had faced a similar hesitancy to accept the label transgender when I was growing up. Here's something I glossed over earlier. I had actually heard about transgender people prior to that classmate of mine who transitioned my freshman year. I mean, apart from my brother and I's glam rock fascination and the many cross-dressing gags and community theater shows I grew up doing, and my dad's oft-repeated anecdote about an old marching band buddy who now lived as a woman, I also had accidentally seen an episode of Oprah about trans kids when I was 11. That episode was actually really powerful for me because not only was it kids my age, but it was also my first exposure I ever had to trans masculine people. In the media, most of the and sensationalized mentions of trans people are trans women, to the point that many trans men don't even realize that being trans can go the other way, so to speak. I remember watching the episode and being positively spellbound. The families showed pictures of the boys growing up, talked about how they were transitioning, the haircuts they got, the hormone blockers they had. It looked incredible. I was certain that's how I felt. But towards the end, Oprah asked one of the older boys if being a boy meant he was interested in girls. He blushed and said yes, and my world came crashing right back down again. Being interested in girls was something that terrified me. I mean, this was Texas in the 90s. My classmates and I were fed the belief that being gay was the scariest thing that could happen to us. I'd been interested in boys since preschool, so I clung to that confidently while pushing any thoughts of girls out of my head. But the thoughts were there, and they terrified me. But the idea, I knew that if I was a boy and liking girls, that wouldn't make me gay. But the idea was still too much to swallow. Plus, who knew if I really even liked girls? And I definitely liked boys, and if being a boy as a trans boy and you liked boys, then that meant you were gay, and that couldn't be a thing. So maybe I just wasn't a boy after all. And that was age 11. So I spent the next 8 years believing that I was an extra special kind of freak. I wasn't just trans. I was gay and trans, or something like that. And clearly that wasn't a thing you could be. There was no way there was anyone else like that in the world. I mean, I had never seen anyone else like that before in my life or in the media I was presented, so as far as I knew, I was alone. I did see myself represented in the media once, in Adam Sandler's 50 First Dates. There's a minor recurring character who is presented as someone female assigned at birth who had a sex change and was now a flaming gay guy who spoke with a lisp and was very clearly portrayed as someone who had made a mistake. As a confused, young, queer, trans kid, here's what I was told by that representation. The way you're feeling is either so absurd and unreal that some comedians coincidentally made it up as a joke that could never happen, or it is real, but if you ever tell anyone that how you feel, or if you ever act on it, you will be the butt of every joke for the rest of your life. So naturally, I kept it hidden. I referred to it in my head as my deep, dark secret. I had a very real fear that if I ever slipped up and told someone, if they ever found out, I'd be taken away and locked up in a mental institution for delusional and perverted feelings. So you can imagine how relieved I was to discover that not only did other trans people exist in the world, but they could be any sexuality, that tons of gay and bisexual and even asexual trans men existed. And in fact, it's almost more common for trans folks to be some level of queer purely because they're open-minded and have had to think about gender roles. But even then, I wasn't so sure I could do it. I wasn't sure I could really transition. The accounts of trans masculine people were few and far between, and mostly older guys, balding, middle-aged, scowling back at me from grainy JPEGs on poorly designed websites. From what I was being told and seeing, I would never be read as male, even with hormone treatment. I certainly wouldn't ever feel as conventionally attractive as I had succeeded as doing as a girl. But one day, a few months into the trans underground, I found a video from Skyler Cargill. He was a musician and artist documenting his transition on YouTube. We were the same age. We had a bunch of the same interests. We dressed similar. He was someone I could easily imagine being in my friend group. And most of all, he looked great and happy, confident even. For the very first time in my life, I saw myself truly represented by the media. Old school YouTube, yes, but the media nonetheless. I knew that I could do it. I could transition and still have a happy, fulfilling life, maybe even more fulfilling. I wouldn't have to give everything up. I wouldn't be rejected. I could see a future for myself. The thing about representation is that if you never see yourself in the media, it's almost like you don't exist. For people of color or people with different abilities, this often means not realizing that you can grow up and be anything you want to be, because the only representation you get is of stereotyped or tokenized characters, never doctors or presidents or any of the admirable representation that white, straight, able-bodied people get. For me, the absolute zero representation of trans male characters or even real people in the media meant I actually thought I was alone in the world. I didn't have any words to describe what I felt or know what to do about it. But once you see that representation, you're like, wait, that's me. I can do it. And suddenly the whole world is open to you. Suddenly you can be proud of who you are. And seeing Skyler Cargill as a positive role model made me finally start feeling okay with accepting that I was trans. And the same thing had to happen with accepting the title of activist. At least from the media and culture I'd been exposed to growing up in Texas, activists got a bad rap. It wasn't a very positive thing at all. But when I joined the HPA, I met very positive people, kind-hearted, compassionate, real people who were always fighting for what was right, speaking up, putting their words into practice, and it turned out what they were doing, they called that activism. Sometimes they called it fan activism or called themselves wizard activists, but the main noun was still there, activist. Was I an activist? I mean, could I be one? If being an activist meant doing what I did with the HPA as a fan activist, using my fandom powers for good and imagining people complexly, then yeah, I was an activist. And if activists were people like the founders of the HPA, the most loving people ever who had unconditionally accepted me, then heck yes, I wanted to be an activist. I guess part of figuring out your identity and accepting these labels that help define who you are isn't just about learning what the words really mean and seeing positive role models expressing those words, but it's also about defining those words for yourself. It was easier to figure out what being an activist meant to me when I could first work with the rest of the community to define what being a fan activist and more specifically a wizard activist meant to all of us. We're not activists in the same way other activists are in this room. We use the power of story. And we use our unironic enthusiasm. We think optimistically about the world without forgetting why we're fighting. And even within our wizard activist community, we each approach that world a little bit differently. Just like how being trans can mean something different to me than it does to another person, I mean, I had to spend years coming to terms with not just what being transgender as a dictionary definition meant, but also what it meant for me. As a trans man, I believe that I can express my gender however I want. I don't have to bend to hypermasculinity or accept misogynistic behavior just so I can fit in and prove I'm really a man. I can love whoever I want, wear whatever I want. None of that means that I'm not a man or not trans. That's how I define it for myself. Just like how, as an activist, I choose to meet people where they're at and actively listen to them instead of yelling at them. I choose to be aspirational rather than cynical. And I accept that I'm an imperfect activist who's always learning. I mean, I can stand up here and say these things to you today, but promising that that's exactly how I'll feel tomorrow is harder. So we're all constantly changing, learning, growing, and that's good. That's really good. Part of knowing your identity is knowing your strengths and weaknesses. But in order to embark on our journeys as heroes, we need a sturdy foundation to start from. We have to know ourselves enough to be able to make tough decisions consistent with our morals and our identities. It's okay if small pieces of your identity are still coming together or in a constant flux. The important part is to commit to the larger underlying force that drives you. Unfortunately for me, I'm pretty terrible at commitment. That sounds like a cliche Tinder bio, but no, seriously, I can't even spell the word. It's the word that caused me to lose the grammar challenge for my team in 9th grade English class. I mean, I still can't spell it on the first try every time. When I was writing this keynote, every instance of the word was underlined in red squiggly. I mean, I'm just nervous about commitment. Like in high school, I entered every single crush thinking, okay, yeah, they're cute, but like, how will this affect our lives when we break up? Like, I've never dyed my hair permanently because I'm like scared of like lasting consequences. I've always been against getting a tattoo for myself because like I'm not opposed to tattoos in any way. The idea of anything permanent terrifies me. But recently, I allowed my friend to give me a tattoo. A small dagger on the back of my right ankle, my Achilles heel. I'm not a fan of violence, but I think of a dagger as more of a defensive weapon. You know, a small knife that a hero would keep just in case of danger. The kind of weapon that Peter Pan had versus Captain Hook's sabers and cannonballs. And I put the dagger on the back of my ankle because even on my Achilles heel, the one place where Achilles was unprotected, I am now protected. Even in my weakest spot, I can defend myself and rise to the challenge. I'm invincible. Not because I'm foolhardy or drank a magic potion or made a pact with the devil, but because I choose to stand up and face my fears head on. And one of the biggest battles I faced recently was coming out as transgender last year. Coming out was permanent too. Way more permanent than a tattoo in some ways, actually. And I think it's actually having done the terrifying deed of coming out that made getting a tattoo a few weeks ago not seem as scary as it did before. And the thing about coming out as transgender, or really as anything, is that you can't put that smoke back in the bottle. I was so scared when I was questioning my gender identity that if I told anyone how I felt, it would forever change how they viewed me, even if it wasn't a negative action per se. Like, if I were to decide not to transition and to live out my life in a female presentation, those people I told would always know my dirty little secret. I had to get over thinking of it as shameful. And one thing that helped with that a lot was a friend who told me that even if how I was feeling was a phase, something a lot of queer and trans people get told by family members in denial, it's just a phase. Well, even if it was just a phase, that doesn't make it any less valid. That doesn't make your feelings at the time any less real, your needs any less important. It means that you can recognize what's right for you at the right time. And last year, it was finally the right time for me to move forward with transitioning. The awkward thing with transitioning as a trans person is that there's only so far along you can go before it's noticeable. Like, coming out as trans isn't the same as coming out as gay or pan or other sexualities. When you come out, you usually tell people they need to start using a new name and different pronouns. You might start dressing differently or even begin a medical transition. It's not something you can simply hide by not talking about a certain part of your life. It's all out there for people to see. And as someone who had built up a little bit of an audience and whose job is going around speaking in front of groups of people like this, there were a lot of people who were going to be watching this process. Once I had made the decision, there was no way I could hide it. There was no option for me to have a private transition. I had to be public with it. And the way I was able to own that decision, make it feel less like something that was being forced upon me, was to remember the messages that I'd gotten from other queer and trans people about how my videos helped them. I thought about how alone and confused I was without anyone to look up to. I thought about how much even just that one video from Skyler Cargill had helped me. I mean, I know the world at large doesn't really need another white dude stealing the mic, which is why I will always try to put trans people of color, especially women, ahead of me. But when it comes to trans representation, we are so far behind that all positive and authentic representation is still needed. My coming out video that I posted currently has over 70,000 views. It was received by a warm flood of support that I can still barely believe, but also by endless messages from fellow trans and queer people, as well as families and friends sharing their stories and asking for advice. And I am still can't even articulate how humbled I am by that response and how glad I am that I can be in any way helpful to other people on their journeys. But it was still one of the scariest things I've ever done. And that's okay. Being a leader is scary. As they say, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to take action even in the face of fear. And I am still scared a lot of the time, but I resolve to take the lead when I can, to push myself to do so. Maybe I still prefer the sidekick role, but you know what? Robin kicked butt. It wasn't all Batman. And also, what about the other Robin, the one from the Robert Galbraith books, Cormoran Strike's Deputy Detective? I don't understand why the series isn't named after her. She's way cooler. It's like Colossus said in Deadpool. 4 or 5 moments. That's all it takes to become a hero. Everyone thinks it's a full-time job. Wake up a hero, brush your teeth a hero, go to work a hero. Not true. Over a lifetime, there are only 4 or 5 moments that really matter. Moments when you're offered a choice to make a sacrifice, conquer a flaw, save a friend, spare an enemy. In these moments, everything else falls away. Now, hopefully at GLA, we'll all be well equipped to be a hero more than 4 or 5 times. But don't worry, because no one's counting. You have to be a hero to yourself before you can be a hero to others. That's why you have to work on the foundation of your hero identity before you can move forward and commit to taking the lead. And part of being a hero to yourself is practicing that self-care. Knowing when is a healthy and safe time for you to take the lead. Working on ways to take action that work for you in each unique situation and suited to your own unique challenges and abilities. Everyone has a part to play. Everyone in each community can help, and we all should. Even if every moment isn't our big hero moment, we can remember to be heroes in the way we see the world. Remembering to view everyone we encounter complexly, and doing our best to make every space a safe space, even if we don't think it needs to be. You never know what secret identities people might have hidden behind their hero masks. And those kind of goals, that's the kind of thing I can commit to. That is the kind of activist I know I can be. So that first panel I was on, back at MIT, when I insisted I was not an activist, some of the attendees found our resistance to the label so fascinating that they've made it the subject of their conclusion of their upcoming book, By Any Media Necessary, which you can pick up in bookstores on May 3rd, the day before my birthday. Happy birthday to me. One of my most embarrassing moments published in print for all to read. And it's one of my most embarrassing moments because the thing is, if I could go back to that day, I would change what I said. I mean, I still don't think that all art needs to be activist in intention, but I do think that all art has to be responsible. I know that, and we all know that as purveyors of fan activism. Stories are powerful vehicles. They inspire and teach, but they can also fail to teach and cause harm. We have to hold our stories and our storytellers responsible. Words have influence, even if you didn't mean them to. Words like activist. I wasn't ready for that word to have influence on my life a few years ago, but I am now. I'm an activist, a fan activist, an imperfect activist, a wizard activist. Whatever word fits best each day, I know that I can be a hero for myself and for the rest of the world. And no matter what I thought as a kid, the world actually could if everyone was a hero. Because not everyone is a hero all the time. But if everyone always strove to be heroic and helped others when they couldn't be in that moment, recognizing that they too have that same hero potential, well, that's the kind of world I wouldn't have wanted to be taken away from. So let's work together to make that world a reality. Oh boy.